Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Back with another forecast discussion for today as we have a potentially significant severe weather outbreak that is expected to begin tomorrow, especially tomorrow evening, and then peaking on Wednesday. Wednesday has been the day that folks have really been honing in on so far with this particular setup, and then the threat will shift southeast into day 4, which is Thursday. So lots to talk about. You can see the SPC outlook's very colorful the next several days, and that is because we have an active pattern that is in place right now. We do have some severe weather to talk about today. We're not going to go too in-depth into this event today. It is a continuation of the convection from yesterday. There was some quite a bit of severe weather from the Midwest all the way down into the southern plains yesterday, and that has shifted off to the east into the eastern seaboard and southeast today. SPC maintains an enhanced risk at the latest update. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia ahead of an ongoing MCS that will continue to pose a threat for damaging winds and a few tornadoes here going into the afternoon hours today. Large hail not going to be much of a threat, but just wanted to make you aware of the threats for today. This is what we have going on right now. This is our QLCS that is ongoing across the southeast at this point. Going to continue to watch that for the best chances for severe weather, including damaging winds and maybe a few spin-up tornadoes later on this afternoon. And also with any supercells that can persist and sustain themselves out ahead of the QLCS across the Carolinas into Georgia, those could pose a risk for all hazards as well. And then we could see some additional development up farther to the north in the slight risk region up here. Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, down toward D.C., Virginia could see some additional development this afternoon, although instability is a bit weaker up here to the north. Those storms could produce damaging winds and perhaps a tornado or two. But the main event that we're going to be talking about in this video today is the event that is expected to begin tomorrow, particularly tomorrow evening, going through the day on Wednesday. Wednesday appears to be the most potent of the next several days, and then Thursday could see some severe weather continue as well. So this is what the SPC has for tomorrow, Tuesday, April 1st. This is not an April Fool's joke, unfortunately. Lots of folks under the gun with this initial round of storms tomorrow. SPC for now has a slight risk level 2 out of 5. By the time you see this video, they will probably have another outlook up. But for now, I'm recording this just after 11:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time. So by the time you see this, they will have the new Day 2 outlook up. But as I'm recording this now, they have a large slight risk from the Midwest all the way down into the southern plains. So all the way up from eastern Nebraska, Iowa, into western Illinois, southwestward through the southern plains, Kansas, much of Oklahoma, into northern and central Texas. Abilene, Wichita Falls, Oklahoma City, Norman, Tulsa, Wichita, Kansas City, Omaha, Des Moines, all in that level 2 out of 5 at slight risk for tomorrow. Tomorrow's threat is fairly complex, but there is an all-hazards threat that is on the table, including a tornado risk, which is somewhat conditional at this point. We'll talk about the reasons why here in just a second, but there is a 5% risk that extends up toward basically the Kansas City area southward through much of southeast Kansas. Wichita is included in that, down through Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Lawton, and down toward the Wichita Falls area. That looks to be the best chance for tornadoes in this setup for tomorrow. Damaging winds also going to be a threat, along with a threat for large to possibly very large hail in the yellow stippled region there. So widespread severe weather expected tomorrow, particularly tomorrow evening. And then we go into Wednesday. Wednesday has been the most well-advertised day of this upcoming stretch. There is a large enhanced risk now. They actually apparently debated on including higher probabilities for this day 3 outlook as discussed in the text down here, but they went with a large enhanced risk given a little bit of uncertainty that remains, basically from the Great Lakes states, far southern Wisconsin, southern Michigan, all the way south and southwestward into the Arklatex region. Lots of folks under the gun for this one. Chicago, Indianapolis, Springfield, Illinois, St. Louis, Memphis, Little Rock, Greenville, Mississippi, Shreveport, all in that level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk for Wednesday, April 2nd. Slight risk extends outside of that, including Dallas, Fort Worth, down to Waco, and up into the areas like Detroit, Cleveland, Milwaukee, and Green Bay. So a lot of folks under the gun for Wednesday. Still some uncertainty, but it does look to be a fairly potent event coming up on Wednesday. Then the threat will continue into Thursday along this 15% risk area from basically Pittsburgh southwestward through the southern plains toward the Dallas-Fort Worth area and everywhere in between Little Rock, Memphis, Nashville, Louisville, up toward Columbus and Pittsburgh, Cincinnati in that as well. So the threat will continue into Thursday, April 3rd. Going to focus mostly on the threat tomorrow and Wednesday in this video. We're going to have to kind of wait and see how Wednesday plays out to get a better idea of how Thursday will proceed. But let's go ahead and take a look at some things right now. This is the current 500 millibar map at this point. Mostly zonal flow across the U.S. Zonal is west to east flow. A little bit of some low-end troughing down here across the kind of Arklatex region impinging upon the southeast, kind of helping to keep that line going that we saw across the southeast this afternoon. A little bit of a trough up here into Canada as well. And then you see back here to the west, some stronger flow starting to peek into the left side of the screen there. That is our next weather system. That's our next trough that's taking shape there across the west coast. And that will continue to evolve over the next several days, shift off to the east and northeast, and give us plenty of forcing for severe weather, particularly as it moves up into the Midwest and Great Lakes region, with some more subtle forcing, but still perhaps adequate forcing down here from the Mid-South down into the Southern Plains for Tuesday into Wednesday especially. Surface map at this point, not a ton going on. We have a fairly nice intrusion of some cooler air here, some northerly winds there across much of the plains. So trajectories have not yet turned out of the south ahead of the event tomorrow. That's going to be one thing to watch for tomorrow's setup, is that we're going to have fairly kind of just-in-time moisture, if you will. These winds are not going to flip around to southerly until perhaps this evening into the overnight hours. So that will delay the onset of moisture return a little bit across the southern and central plains, and that will lead to perhaps a more nighttime event across these areas for tomorrow night into early Wednesday morning. So something that we'll have to watch for sure. Let's take a look at the surface observations right now. You see the moisture has been swept down to the south a little bit. Dew points across Oklahoma into Texas in the 30s and 40s. Your most robust moisture down here across the Texas coastal regions down there. Dew points in the low to mid 70s down here with some 60s as well. Again, trajectories out of the north at this point, unfavorable for moisture return, but eventually those will flip around to more southerly or southeasterly as we get surface low development tomorrow, perhaps tonight into tomorrow, and then we will see that moisture return begin in earnest going into tomorrow afternoon and evening. Again, it will be more just-in-time moisture given the delayed start of the moisture return, but by tomorrow evening we should have moisture in place across at least the southern plains, with continued moisture advection expected into the overnight hours Tuesday into Wednesday morning. All right, as we usually do with our videos a few days out from a setup, we're going to take a look at our three main models here: the NAM, the 12Z NAM, the 12Z GFS, and the 6Z Euro. The 12Z Euro not quite out yet as of the recording of this video. So we're going to look at tomorrow's setup first. So here we are, 500 millibars as initialized this morning, and you see that little shortwave here across the southern plains into the Arklatex, helping to keep that line going across the southeast, and then that belt of stronger flow impinging upon the western U.S. That is our next weather system to watch. That will be our next weather maker here. And you see as we go into tonight, we start to get some of that stronger flow to traverse the Rockies, so we may see at least initial surface cyclone development across the central high plains here by as early as this evening into the overnight hours. And then as we get that stronger flow to really start to make its way across the Rockies tomorrow, we will see intense surface cyclogenesis here and a deepening of a surface low somewhere here in the central high plains out ahead of that stronger flow aloft. So this is going into midday tomorrow, mid-afternoon, and then going in towards 0Z tomorrow, 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Not a very well-defined, real well-defined shortwave in this pattern. Just kind of some broad southwesterly flow. A little bit of a wave here up, perhaps across the central plains, up here from Nebraska into Kansas. Forcing certainly should be a little bit stronger up here, so a little bit less conditional threat for storm initiation up here across the central plains ahead of slightly stronger forcing. Down here to the south, forcing will be maybe a little bit delayed. We will have initially a more glancing blow from this little shortwave. And then as we move into the overnight hours into early Wednesday morning, we'll start to see a little bit more forcing take shape across the central and southern plains for perhaps a conditional threat for some supercell development down in there. So definitely a little bit of a kind of another setup to talk about where we're kind of on a razor's edge with convective development. We saw the other night across Oklahoma early indications were that convective development would be a little bit limited. Eventually, we did see a little bit better signs for convective development, and we actually got quite a bit of convection to develop across Oklahoma into Texas. Same thing with this one. The just-in-time moisture and the overall somewhat more nebulous forcing, at least early on, may preclude storm development and keep the threat overall more conditional across areas, say, from southern Kansas southward into North Texas. But the SPC does see enough of a chance for severe storm development across these areas, again, particularly into the evening hours as forcing increases a little bit for some supercell activity with an all-hazards threat there out across the southern plains. Again, a little bit less conditional threat up here where the forcing is a bit stronger, and we might see, given the tendency for moisture to remain a little bit farther south, more elevated convection initially across areas like Nebraska into Iowa, northern Missouri, northern Kansas, there to the north of the northward progressing warm front that demarcates the leading edge of the moisture return. Let's go down to the surface now, see how things will progress. So once again, not expecting much today. We will start to see at least some signs of cyclogenesis going into the overnight hours and morning hours tomorrow. You see tomorrow morning, 12Z, so 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time, we're starting to see surface low development out here across the central high plains, northeast Colorado, southeast Wyoming, and then that will deepen pretty considerably as we get that stronger flow to really start traversing the Rockies by tomorrow afternoon. Very strong surface low there, sub 984 millibars, it looks like there in northwest Kansas by about 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time tomorrow. So that low-level flow will really flip around out of the south and strengthen, helping to rapidly pump that moisture northward. Again, the onset of that will be delayed, but we will have an efficient mechanism to really transport the moisture northward into at least the central plains, going into the overnight hours, but especially going into the Oklahoma, North Texas region where we're closer to the moisture source. Should be much easier to get more robust moisture in there. Surface low then kind of meanders off to the east and northeast going into the morning on Wednesday. We'll get to Wednesday here in just a second, but by 12Z, 7 a.m. Wednesday, that surface low located on the NAM into parts of northwest Iowa. So let's take a look at our moisture here. So we'll start here. Once again, our most robust moisture has been shunted down to the south across Texas coastal regions. That may continue today, get shunted even a little bit farther south. I'll zoom into our southern plains sector here. You see that continues to get pushed a little bit farther and farther south, just kind of sits there. And then by tonight, we'll start to see, by early tomorrow morning, we'll start to see those winds flip around out of the south to start pulling this moisture northward pretty rapidly, as evidenced by the rapid intensification of the surface low. By 4 p.m., moisture, 60s dew point line up to about Oklahoma City there. So that should be, at least on the NAM here, we'll take a look at the other models in a second, as this is really the important key for tomorrow is the degree of moisture return and the timing of the moisture return lined up with the timing of the forcing. By 0Z, the 60s dew point line basically up to the Kansas-Oklahoma border there, with continued advection going into the overnight hours. You see a very tight dry line develop. And this is going to be one of the things that we watched with our last setup. We talked about the orientation of the dry line with respect to the initiating, to the overall low-level winds, and how the winds last time along the dry line, very similar looking dry line here, kind of north to south, maybe with some southwest slant, but the winds in the low levels, the 850 millibar winds, were much more across the dry line, which gave us a little bit more skepticism in overall storm development. Didn't end up being an issue. We got some dry line development, especially down to the south where temperatures maybe were a little bit warmer, a little bit better orientation to the dry line. But let's take a look at that here. So this is on the NAM. This is going to be at 0Z. So that the dry line, I'll draw in the dry line here out across southern Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas. Let's take a look at our low-level winds here. So you see a much different picture here with this setup compared to the last one. Last one, those low-level winds were much more across the dry line, helping to really blow dry that drier air to the west of the dry line into the area off into the warm sector. That is not the case with this one. Low-level winds are very much parallel to the dry line you see here, which gives me a lot more confidence that we're going to see at least isolated development along the dry line here. And that continues as we go into the evening. You see those low-level winds by 3Z, very much still parallel to the dry line. So any updrafts that start to go up by early evening, I would think should be able to sustain themselves in this environment. We're going to take a look at the thermodynamic profiles here in a second, but this is much more favorable for getting isolated dry line development, because those updrafts that go up along the dry line are going to be able to stay in the zone of ascent along the dry line much longer than if the winds were more across the dry line. So that is going to allow them to give them some extra oomph to perhaps mature into robust supercells going into tomorrow evening. So much different than our last setup here. And if our last setup was able to initiate a few storms there that moved into Oklahoma, they didn't end up doing much as far as tornadic activity. But if that setup was able to do it, this one with much better low-level wind orientation with respect to the initiating boundary has me thinking that the chances for development along the dry line are a little bit better than our last event. So you see here the moisture continues to pump up off to the north going into the overnight hours. Very tight dry line there. So let's take a couple of soundings here across the dry line to see how we're going to be able to really initiate storms here. So let's take one here western Oklahoma, then we'll take one down here across northwest Texas as well. So this is going to be at 0Z, so 7 p.m. Again, the forcing is still a little bit on the weaker side here by this point. This is 500 millibars, this is 700 millibars. Perhaps a little bit of a short wave here. That may have to do with the extent, the vertical extent of the dry line, but still perhaps a little bit of a wave, a little bit stronger flow here. So that could be a little bit of assistance for us in getting storms to go. And here is the NAM at 0Z on 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. You see the profiles here. Still quite a bit of dry air aloft, very similar to our last setup here a couple of days ago. But our moist layer is quite a bit deeper. You see our moisture here is up to about 800 millibars or so, which is fairly deep, much deeper than the last setup, which we had very shallow moisture. Instability, certainly more than adequate, about 2,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE here. A little bit of capping remains, so that remains to be seen. The NAM certainly does appear to have a bit of cloud cover associated with this rapid moisture return. You see our dry lines here. A lot cooler temperatures there along the in the warm sector to the east of the dry line, so that could indicate some cloud cover. We know the NAM has a bias towards slightly cooler temperatures, so this capping, though, fairly minimal, only about minus 50 mixed layer convective inhibition. That is fairly negligible, especially if we have any little forcing mechanisms, including convergence along the dry line, better chances for storms to stay in that zone of ascent along the dry line. So this sounding is certainly very, very close and would make me think that we might be able to get convective initiation here as early as perhaps 7 to 8 p.m., right about sunset or so. So that's certainly something to watch for tomorrow. Deeper moisture, still some drier air aloft, but given the fact that those updrafts are going to be able to stay in the zone of ascent along the dry line, has me thinking that we might be able to negate this cap, this weak cap, and initiate storms here in parts of Oklahoma by early tomorrow evening. Now take a look at this wind profile. This wind profile is pretty impressive, and that's why we're watching the chances for storm development very, very closely along the dry line here, because this wind profile would certainly favor a threat for significant tornadoes tomorrow night if storms can fire. Again, it is somewhat conditional, but look at this wind profile. Very strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height, strong low-level jet. As that low-level cyclone continues to strengthen, that is leading to very strongly clockwise curved hodographs, strong low-level shear, over 500 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. That is extremely impressive. So if storms can go, they will have a tendency to be robust and produce significant tornadoes possibly. Again, that's a very conditional risk, and the SPC does not have a significant tornado risk out at the moment. Again, by the time you see this video, they will probably have a new outlook out, so we will see what they say with the upcoming outlook. But for now, they don't have a significant tornado risk as storm development is still a little bit in question. But if storms develop in this environment, that would certainly favor all hazards, including significant damaging winds and perhaps tornadoes, a few of which could be strong. Here we are farther south across Texas, and we're a little bit more out of the low-level jet core there, a little bit stronger capping down here with southern extent, perhaps weaker forcing down into Texas. So storm initiation with southern extent is a lot more conditional, but up here in Oklahoma, certainly watching very closely to see if storms will fire. let's go to 3Z here. As we continue to get moisture into the region, the low-level jet will remain strong. So let's see. As we go toward 3Z, this will be 10 p.m. tomorrow evening, Central Time, kind of west central Oklahoma here. And you see we still kind of continue to build that cap in a little bit. But that's normal. And if we already have storms ongoing in this environment, we've talked about this before, mature supercells that fire and can get mature can move into a more hostile environment and persist into a more hostile environment for longer. So we'll have to watch this. If storms can go fairly early ahead of this capping, they will be able to take advantage of this pretty insane wind profile here. The NAM probably a little bit too aggressive, as it usually is with the low-level winds, but my goodness, look at that. Look at that low-level photograph there. Almost 700 meters squared per second squared effective storm level velocity. 65 knot low-level jet there out of the south-southwest. So very impressive if supercells can fire. Certainly would favor all hazards, including a threat for tornadoes, perhaps a strong tornado or two there. So again, this threat is conditional for tomorrow night, but if storms can fire here across southern Kansas and Oklahoma by early evening especially, then we may be in business for a pretty robust event going into the evening and nighttime hours tomorrow night. Up farther to the north, again, moisture advection is a little bit on the slower side, so storms here probably will fire a little bit earlier, a little bit less conditional up here, but the moisture is a little bit weaker, so thermodynamics will be likely weaker. So these storms will have a tendency to be more elevated in nature, mostly just a large, perhaps very large hail threat, with storms here across central to northern Kansas, southeast Nebraska, and eventually into Iowa and Missouri as we go into the overnight hours. You see a little bit cooler surface there, a little bit less moisture, so a little bit stronger capping would pose a risk for mostly large hail. If a storm can get surface-based, would have a tornado risk, but that looks to be fairly conditional at this point. So mostly just a large hail and damaging wind risk farther north. If storms can fire a little bit farther south, closer to the better moisture, could perhaps be surface-based, but mostly a large hail threat up there across northern areas of the risk going into tomorrow evening and the overnight. Then let's first just take a quick look at some other things here as far as the moisture return goes, as that is going to be key for tomorrow's setup. Let's go ahead and take a look at the GFS moisture return to compare it to the NAMs. You see much of the same processes. By 21Z, that moisture, that 60s dew point line all the way up into Oklahoma, even northwest Oklahoma there. And by 0Z, we see that up into southern Kansas. 3Z, very nice tight dry line here, just like the NAM was showing. So GFS looks to be on board with the NAM for once. Not often you say that, but with moisture return, fairly similar here by 0Z. Let me go back to our southern plains sector on the NAM. That is 0Z. The GFS is actually even a little bit more aggressive than the NAM with the surface moisture return. So very interesting, and that I'm definitely liking our chances for perhaps isolated supercell development along the dry line going toward the early to mid-evening hours tomorrow. Here is the HREF, the high resolution ensemble forecast system. So basically our cams taken as an ensemble. So you see there by 0Z, the cam's a little bit less robust with the moisture, although keep in mind that this is an ensemble, so this is an average. So one of the cams might be way too not aggressive with the moisture, which would bring that average down a little bit. But still, we have those 60s dew points past Oklahoma City to the north of OKC by 0Z, and they continue to advect northward up into southern Kansas by 3Z, 10 p.m. So all signs point to rapid moisture return for tomorrow, and that may yield that threat for some evening and nighttime supercell activity down here along the dry line that could be pose a risk for all hazards, perhaps significant. All right, let's back things out here. We'll go back to the CONUS sector, and we will go back to 500 millibars here, and let's take a look at Wednesday. Wednesday, again, has been the most advertised day of this upcoming stretch, and so let's go ahead and take a look, try to find some of our outcomes here that could be possible for Wednesday. So we'll start at 0Z Wednesday, so 7 p.m. tomorrow, and take a look at how this 500 millibar trough progresses. Just a very broad trough here, perhaps that little shortwave up here across the Central Plains. Then we go into Wednesday, and we kind of see that develop into a more robust shortwave here. A little bit of a closed circulation there, clear little shortwave and strong, potent jet streak there, stretching from the Central Plains into the Midwest. And it does kind of eject off to the north, interestingly enough. And the timing of this is interesting. The NAM has this here. Here's your jet streak. Here would be your kind of exit region here, left exit region up in here. This is at 18Z, so this is 1 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, and your main area of interest might be up farther off to the north, northern Illinois, up into Wisconsin, over into the Great Lakes region there. So the timing of this looks to be a little bit interesting. It looks to kind of move off to the northeast, perhaps giving mostly just a glancing blow to southern portions of the warm sector here, leaving the rest of the warm sector down here in mostly just broad southwesterly flow, which will be interesting to see. We're going to take a look at 700 millibars to see if we can see any shortwaves here, but looks like storm initiation may get going fairly early in this event on Wednesday, given the overall timing of this wave. I mean, this is at 12Z. By 18Z, it's already progressed into the Great Lakes region, and even further by 0Z, the core of the jet right over Lake Michigan there. So that tells me that we might see fairly early initiation. We should already have a fairly robust warm sector in place, so it's not really going to matter all that much, but storms may get going fairly early here across these areas. So 18Z, that is the NAM. Let's take a look at the GFS here. GFS, much of the same progression. 18Z, see here on the NAM and the GFS, fairly much in lockstep here. Very robust shortwave, 120, 130 knots of flow within that jet streak here, and most of that forcing is going to be well within the exit region there up. So kind of that eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, over into perhaps northern Indiana, and eventually into toward Michigan could be where the forcing is strongest. Much more glancing blow down here to the south, central to southern Illinois, Missouri, down to the south, going into the Arklatex region. Mostly just broad southwesterly flow there. See the European model as well for the 500 millibar progression. Here we go, much of the same, a little bit less robust here, not quite as strong of a closed circulation, but still a very strong jet streak here, pointing up into that Midwest region. So the models are pretty much on board with the same solution here, pretty much the same timing. So early initiation looks to be a pretty good bet with this setup, as the models are pretty much in lockstep with the timing and overall progression of the 500 millibar system. Going down to 700 millibars, I'm interested to see if we have any little shortwave activity down here farther to the south, where forcing is going to be a little bit more subtle. So going into the day on Wednesday, here's 700 millibars. Not really seeing a whole lot here in the way of shortwave activity out across these areas. Mostly just broad southwesterly flow, which is interesting. That is going to leave things much more subtle down here. So definitely something to watch. 700 millibar flow by 21Z. Not much going on there. There is a little wave here in the GFS that looks to pop out. That could be convectively enhanced. So that'll be something to watch for sure. But overall, just kind of broad southwesterly flow. If we have any forcing mechanisms here in the open warm sector, we should have a broad warm sector as well. That could spell trouble with more subtle background forcing. Let's go ahead and take a look at the overall surface pattern here. Going back toward tomorrow evening, surface low eventually meanders off to the northeast up into Iowa by the morning on Wednesday. And we continue to see by 18Z that surface low, main surface low up here into Minnesota, ejecting off to the northeast. Interesting here that our low-level winds appear to be a little bit veered, a little bit out of the southwest, and except for areas farther to the east. So some similarities to yesterday's setup, where across the Midwest, Mid-South, and into the Arklatex, where the low-level winds might be a little bit on the veered side, perhaps decreasing low-level shear just a tad. Interested to see if all the models have this solution. So going forward here at the surface, that low continues to move off to the north. Similar solution, maybe a little bit back to the west there from the NAM, pretty much on par with the NAM. Not really seeing a whole lot here, a lot of difference compared to the NAM with the GFS. Here's the NAM, here's the GFS. Very similar solution. Tighter surface low, stronger surface low with the GFS. Interestingly enough, the NAM is usually the one with the stronger surface low. So that would definitely tell me that your strongest forcing is going to be up here, closer to that surface low, closer to the actual short wave. And that's probably going to be where your forcing is strongest, and probably your convective coverage is going to be highest up here. Wind fields should remain strong. We should have a strong low-level jet across these regions. Very strong wind fields here, with a continuation of that low-level jet all the way down into even the Arklatex region here, 30 to 40 knots down here. And then kind of the core of that low-level jet along the Mississippi River Valley there. So very strong kinematics with this system. Let's go ahead and take a look at the warm sector and how the warm sector is going to be constructed. Here on the NAM, you see very broad warm sector, and one difference here between yesterday's setup and this Wednesday setup looks to be that the frontal zone, especially with southern extent, will stall here. Notice the moisture boundary here, the cold front likely right in here, and then your kind of dry line / Pacific front in there pretty much stalls out in here. And even it actually retreats back to the north a little bit. The NAM has it almost up back toward the OKC area, interestingly enough. So that is going to lead to a much better chance for more discrete supercells. We have a very broad warm sector in here. The NAM certainly is quite a bit farther to the west than what the GFS might show here. Let's take a look at the GFS moisture going back a little bit here. So the moisture continues to advect off to the north into Wednesday, but you see here that things kind of stall out a little bit there. A little bit farther east, though. Certainly the GFS is a little bit farther east with the actual surface boundaries here, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. So some discrepancy there. European model, let's see what the Euro model is showing. So the European model, a little bit more progressive here with the overall frontal zone. The dry line here certainly does stall down into the Red River region. Cold front up in here, probably going to be your initiating boundary up in there. And so let's take a few soundings here just from across the region. This is very interesting. So still some discrepancy in the overall surface pattern here. Again, I suspect storms will initiate fairly early in this environment up here, even as far north as southern Wisconsin into Illinois. So we'll take one up there, central Illinois. How about up here into 18Z? We'll start at 18Z because storms should be ongoing by then. Then down into northern Arkansas, and then maybe one down to the south here across Texas. So the NAM here certainly with a robust solution. Here we are off to the north, and a little bit more limited instability here at 18Z. Some more skinny cape profiles here, still about 1,500 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, with a wind profile that would favor all severe hazards, including tornadic activity. Again, I think given the degree of forcing and perhaps the progression of the cold front near that surface low up to the north where the forcing is strongest, probably going to be more of a QLCS type mode up here, but still strong low-level shear could produce some tornadoes within the line. Down to the south across Arkansas, interesting here that the NAM has fairly saturated low-level profiles, not all that favorable. Low-level lapse rates on the weaker side here. Again, could be just a NAM quirk, but that'll be something to watch. Wind profiles, though, certainly have not much to be desired. Very strong low-level shear, upwards of 450 meters squared per second squared. This, again, is in kind of north-central Arkansas. It's very strong low-level shear. Little bit of a kink here in the mid-levels of the wind profiles. You see the kind of backing here in the flow. The wind's at 850 out of the southwest, a little bit more southerly component there off to the north, or off in the vertical there. So a little bit of a veer-back veer signature here, a little bit of a loop-de-loop there in the hodograph. I don't know if that'll have much of an impact. If you can get discrete supercells, it doesn't usually have much of an impact, but we'll have to watch that, as that could have some influence on the overall storm longevity and mesocyclone longevity with storms down here. Farther south, less low-level shear away from the jet core down here into the Arklatex region, southeast Oklahoma. So would perhaps be more of a large hail and damaging wind risk down here, perhaps outside chance of a tornado or two, at least looking at the NAM with a little bit stronger instability with southern extent. So some questions we still have: the degree of instability. The NAM certainly, which is the more aggressive model usually with instability, certainly has less with northward extent, increases that with southward extent, but your low levels are a little bit on the weak side for robust tornadic activity. But look at this, how broad this warm sector is. That's going to leave plenty of opportunity for there to be more open warm sector activity on any confluence bands out in here. Winds in the warm sector, in the open warm sector, much more backed here. Let's take a sounding right here at Little Rock. I would suspect that's going to be more closer to your jet core there, your low-level jet core. Then as we move off to the east, and then we'll take a sounding here, maybe off to Missouri Boot Heel vicinity. So yeah, the NAM's still definitely on the weaker side with the low levels here. Definitely have something weird in the models, not able to destabilize the low levels, interestingly enough. Doesn't look like an elevated mixed layer or capping inversion, so to speak. And up here to the north, though, there you go. Still some skinny cape profiles up here to the north. This is the Missouri Boot Heel, but your wind profiles certainly favorable for significant tornadoes there. But overall, still, given the degree of forcing off to the north, so let's just kind of summarize things here. Given the degree of forcing off to the north near the surface low and where that jet streak is located, we're probably going to get fairly early initiation with a lot of convective coverage here. All the forcing mechanisms in play, probably going to be a lot of convection up here closer to that surface low ahead of that jet streak. Probably by mid to late morning, storms will develop there into the Great Lakes region and Midwest. Farther to the south, forcing is a little bit more nebulous. If we do have any little short waves moving through, any confluence bands, then we're more likely to get storm development down here, southern Illinois, southeast Missouri, Arkansas, and we still have some discrepancy on where the overall warm sector is going to set up. The NAM has it well back to the west here, almost back to the OKC area, down into north central Texas. The other models a lot farther off to the east here, more Arklatex into Arkansas, eastward. So forcing definitely a little bit weaker with southern extent. The wind profiles definitely decrease as you go south, but the NAM certainly has some instability issues across this area. Let's take a quick look at the GFS here. Just take a couple of soundings here, and we'll get a little bit more information tomorrow, no doubt. I'm going to try to be back tomorrow morning for another video here. The GFS, so this is really interesting. The GFS, which is usually the model that has much weaker instability, is on a whole different page than the NAM. The GFS shows a very robust thermodynamic environment, very strong instability, 2100 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, much fatter instability here throughout the profile, stronger low-level instability, 83/69 at the surface there, so very moist low levels, deep moist layer there with kinematics to match, strong low-level shear, strong deep layer shear. So this would certainly favor more of a robust supercell threat. That's kind of central Arkansas there. Off to the north, let's take a sounding. This is at 4 p.m., mind you. So the GFS, usually the roles have kind of been reversed here. The GFS showing a lot more robust environment. Off to the north, a little still skinny instability there, but more than adequate, 1300 joules per kilogram CAPE, strong low-level shear. So the GFS, we still have quite a bit of discrepancy here. That's kind of the main thing to take away. The ceiling with this event certainly is high. Strong low-level and deep layer shear through a broad region from the Midwest to the Mid-South is going to set the stage for perhaps some significant supercells with all hazards, possibly strong tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds. Suspect a more strongly forced convection up here to the north, more of a squall line type deal, perhaps, and then down here to the south, where the warm sector is extremely broad, plenty of real estate to support robust supercells, but again, the NAM not showing quite as robust of an instability profile, not just at the surface, which is usually its quirk, but through the entire low levels of the atmosphere. But overall, very strong shear modeled on all of our models here. So that is just something to keep in mind. This certainly is not a slam dunk event by any means. It honestly looks to me somewhat similar to yesterday's event where we had all that activity from the Midwest to the Mid-South. It did kind of eventually congeal into more of a squall line. The significant tornado threat did not materialize. The difference with this setup is we're going to have a much stronger and more tight surface low, so a much more defined warm sector, much broader warm sector, to perhaps support more discrete development, but it's going to hedge on the instability and the degree of forcing farther south, which looks somewhat nebulous at this point away from that main jet streak. So overall, still lots of questions to be answered with Wednesday. So, making any definitive judgments on, if it will be a significant outbreak at this point should be avoided for now. There certainly is the possibility for a significant outbreak on Wednesday, but we just have too many questions at this point to really get into specifics on the overall intensity and where the most intense hazards are expected to set up, overall storm mode, etc. So that's going to wrap things up for this initial video. Again, the threat is going to continue into Thursday as well. We'll have some more info on that as we get to a better picture of what Wednesday is going to look like. But overall, this is what the SPC has now. This is their current day 2 outlook. They will have a new outlook out as by the time you see this video. But for now, they have a slight risk level 2 out of 5 out across from the Midwest all the way down into the Central Plains. Couple of regimes here on tomorrow evening. Storms will likely develop in an elevated capacity off to the north, northern Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, into Illinois, northern Missouri, north of the advancing moisture return. Looks like some at least decent chances for storm development or isolated supercell development from southern Kansas southward into perhaps north Texas. Wind profiles look to be quite strong, and we have a lot more evidence to support storm development along the dry line than we did for our event a couple days ago. So certainly needs to be watched. Still, the threat is conditional, but if supercells can fire, they would have a threat for all severe hazards, possibly some significant severe hazards in the form of very large hail and maybe a strong tornado or two. But again, very conditional at this point. We'll have a little bit more clarity tomorrow morning once we get some more data in. Then we go to Wednesday. Again, lots of questions still remain. There's still some model discrepancy in the overall positioning of these features. What we know, we're going to have strong kinematics here over a broad region from the Great Lakes states all the way down into the Arklatex region. So lots of folks going to be at risk for significant severe weather. Forcing off to the north looks to be a lot stronger. So probably a more strongly forced, a lot more convective coverage up here. Wind field's very strong. Instability probably a little bit weaker up here, but with as much forcing as there is in play, should not be too much of an issue here to get robust convection in a widespread capacity. So perhaps more of a squall line type deal, but damaging winds and tornadoes certainly going to be a threat. Down here to the south, a little bit more in question. There's still quite a bit of discrepancy on where the overall warm sector is going to set up, but it looks like we are going to have a very broad warm sector, leaving lots of real estate for perhaps multiple rounds of severe storms back along the cold front and dry line to the west, and any open warm sector storms. Some discrepancy in the models on the overall instability. The NAM certainly on the weaker side, with especially in the low levels with instability, whereas the GFS is more robust. If we get robust instability to develop, then we'll have a robust severe threat to accompany that, with the threat for all severe hazards, including significant tornadoes and strong damaging winds as far south as perhaps central Arkansas. A little bit more of a large hail and damaging wind risk farther south, where low-level shear is a little bit weaker, but overall, much of this enhanced risk going to be under very strong kinematics here for Wednesday to support an all hazards risk. But too many questions remain to really get into the overall specifics with the event, but certainly the ceiling is high. A widespread severe weather outbreak is possible with the threat for significant severe hazards. And then we go into Thursday, and we get that threat to continue likely along the cold front there. But we'll have to see how Wednesday plays out to get more information on Thursday. So just have your severe weather plans in place. Make sure you have an airtight severe weather plan in place in case severe weather comes to your area. Have multiple ways of receiving warnings, and I will have more updates here on the page, hopefully tomorrow morning with another video as we get a little bit more information on the overall setup. But certainly a lot of folks under the gun here, so want to make sure that we all stay safe through the next few days as this threat materializes. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.